I'm a 57-year-old man, and I've spent the last 26 years married to Emily, the love of my life. We became friends in college, knowing each other for a decade before we tied the knot. During those 10 years, we enjoyed 2 years of friendship, followed by a year where I was actively pursuing her, and then 7 years of dating, which included a couple of years apart due to our jobs in different cities. Our relationship survived the trials of time and distance. Emily was more than just my wife and the mother of our kids. She was my closest companion since college. She understood me better than anyone else, which makes her betrayal all the more devastating. About a week ago, Emily and I attended our college reunion, a yearly event celebrating the classes that graduated 35 years ago. It's a grand occasion, complete with performances from singers and celebrities that alumni eagerly anticipate. This year, it was our class's time to shine. Both Emily and I, along with our classmates, were excited to reconnect and see how everyone had changed over the years. We felt especially proud as one of the few college couples who had married and stayed together through it all. Walking into the event, we were eager to showcase our strong relationship. Little did I realize I was stepping into a trap of my own making. We were enjoying a wonderful time catching up with some of our oldest friends, reliving some of the best moments of our lives when suddenly someone approached us. Let's call him Daniel. Everyone in our class knew about Daniel's long-standing crush on Emily. Emily had always been one of the top students, and like many attractive women, she attracted a fair number of admirers during our college years, me included. But Daniel wasn't your typical flirt. He was persistent, always trying to win her over even when he knew she was in a relationship with me. I've always considered myself a secure partner and never let his advances shake our bond. Even though Daniel knew Emily was out of his league, he kept pursuing her relentlessly. I still remember the day he found out Emily married me. He texted me, claiming she had made a mistake, expressing that he hoped I would treat her well. We both had a good laugh at his foolishness and romantic notions. We hadn't heard from him since that day until the reunion. We assumed he had moved on after all this time, 35 years since college and 26 years since our wedding. To our shock, he was still fixated on Emily. He greeted us with hugs, and while we returned the gesture, Emily chose to shake his hand instead, clearly uncomfortable under his intense gaze. He sat across from her, giving her a strange and penetrating stare that didn't go unnoticed. I couldn't help but ask if he had brought anyone with him. He responded that he was single, mentioning a brief marriage in his 40s that ended in divorce. I expressed my condolences, saying, "I'm sorry to hear that." To which he dramatically replied, "Well, yes, you should be sorry you stole my love," followed by a loud, hysterical laugh. If I were in my 30s, I might have considered confronting him physically, but approaching 60, that just didn't matter anymore. Besides, Daniel isn't the kind of guy you'd be intimidated by. He's more of a sleazy loudmouth who wouldn't make the cut for a sports team. Although everyone heard his joke, there was a palpable silence, and you could feel the discomfort in the air. We brushed it off, but Emily became noticeably quiet. Our close friend from college, Sarah, and I took Emily aside, trying to lift her spirits and encouraging her to shake off the troublemaker and enjoy the evening. Knowing how much Emily tends to overthink things, we worked hard to ease her mind. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Daniel approached us again. I suspected he had been watching us all along. To our surprise, he offered an apology, claiming he never intended to upset her. He insisted that he wanted to make her feel appreciated, saying that despite the years apart and the inevitable aging, she still had an admirer. I couldn't stand his cheesy words and told him to back off. He feigned regret for making her uncomfortable. Emily asked him to leave us alone, but he insisted she forgive him so we could all enjoy what might be our last gathering together. Those words made me think it was time to move on. After all, this was likely our final chance to catch up with old friends, so there was no use dwelling on the past. Emily gave him a hug and urged him to let go. We all hugged it out and made our way to the dance floor to have some fun at the party. As the night progressed, I noticed Emily and Sarah chatting with Daniel, who was standing next to them. He was engaged in conversation and dancing in a comical way, if that makes any sense. I felt relieved that the situation seemed to have resolved, and we could look back on it positively. I kept an eye on them to make sure Emily was okay. I saw Daniel leaning in, whispering something in her ear, and she smiled and nodded. I assumed it wasn't anything inappropriate, or she would have reacted differently. This gave me the green light to relax and enjoy the company of other friends and classmates. About an hour later, I noticed Emily and Sarah had vanished. At first, I didn't think much of it since we were all mingling separately, and I was catching up with old friends too. However, when they didn't return after a while, I started searching for them. I tried calling them, but they didn't answer. It dawned on me that the loud music might be drowning out their phones. After about 30 minutes, Emily came back, but something felt distinctly off. While her appearance hadn't changed, I had a nagging sense that she was a different person. She had grown unusually quiet and kept urging me to leave. Sarah joined us shortly after, but it was strange. Emily and Sarah didn't exchange a single word all night. It made me suspect they had a disagreement because they both avoided eye contact. I kept asking Emily why she seemed so irritated and why she wanted to leave early, but she remained tight-lipped. I wanted to stay until the party ended, but she insisted we leave ahead of schedule. The entire ride home, which took over an hour, was marked by her silence. I repeatedly asked if she was all right, and she only said she was tired and needed rest. This left me feeling uneasy, since she's usually bursting with energy, and seeing her upset without any explanation worried me. I wondered if it had something to do with Sarah, but she simply replied no, offering no further insight. Assuming she was just exhausted, I decided to leave her be. When we got home, while most of our friends were joyfully posting pictures of the evening on social media, reminiscing about the reunion and lamenting that it might be their last, Emily slipped into bed with her eyes closed. I guess she was trying to convince me she was asleep. Why do I think that? Well, it was nearly 2 a.m. when I finally crawled into bed, utterly worn out. I fell asleep almost instantly. I'm not sure how long I had been sleeping when Emily woke me up. She was in tears, her head resting on my chest. I held her close, trying to be supportive, and asked if she felt emotional about seeing her old friends, but she didn't answer. She just kept crying. So, I held her tighter, wanting to comfort her, since she wasn't sharing what was troubling her. As her tears eventually subsided, she revealed something that left me utterly stunned. She confessed that she had cheated on me with Daniel. I was at a complete loss for words, unable to ask her anything further. My mind was frozen in shock. Thoughts raced through my head, trying to piece together the events from the last time I saw Emily, when she was dancing with Daniel and Sarah, and then the three of them disappeared for about an hour. When Emily returned, she had this gloomy expression and insisted we leave the party. She mentioned that Sarah was aware of everything, but Sarah seemed furious with her, which explained Emily's upset demeanor. Still at a loss for words, Emily noticed my shock and began to explain everything on her own. She recounted how, while they were dancing, Daniel kept apologizing for the embarrassment he had caused, especially after she had turned down his advances time and again. He lavished her with compliments, claiming that throughout all his travels, he had never met a woman as extraordinary as her. Emily confessed that she began to believe his flattery and was swayed by his apparent sincerity. He asked her if she would take a walk with him. At first, she said no, but he persisted, insisting it would be their last chance to connect, that she deserved to know his true feelings. Curious to hear what he had to say, she agreed to accompany him for a walk on the college lawn, seeking some peace and quiet. Once there, Daniel openly declared his lifelong love for her, describing her as the most incredible woman on earth. She shared various things he said, but the essence was always the same. Emily admitted she was intoxicated and foolishly succumbed to his words. He began holding her hand while they walked, and in that moment, she felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders, a strange sense of comfort washing over her. I won't delve into explicit details about what she shared, but she recounted everything, absolutely everything. She even mentioned that her guilt hit her when they were in the middle of the act, prompting her to push him away. My mind felt foggy, and my body was numb. She nudged me, searching for some reaction, but I remained silent, needing a moment to process. She continued crying and apologizing, and eventually I told her to go to sleep. We could talk more in the morning. She clung to me tightly, expressing her fear of losing me. I simply closed my eyes and lay there, replaying everything in my mind over and over. As I reflected on the night, I suddenly remembered something that struck me as odd. Daniel had given me a strange, unsettling grin after Emily returned from their makeout session. At the time, I hadn't paid it much attention, but now I realized it must have been his triumphant smile, signaling that he had finally won her over. With that realization, a wave of anger and disgust surged within me. I was far too restless for self-pity, and the thought of sharing a bed with her became unbearable. I noticed she had finally fallen into a deep sleep after hours of crying. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, packed my laptop, wallet, and other essentials into a backpack, and left our home. I loved that woman. We had been married for 26 years, and I couldn't imagine a life without her. We had a family and children, but staying felt impossible. I knew Emily well. If I stayed until morning, she would likely persuade me against separation. So, I checked into a hotel and blocked her number along with all her social media accounts. By the time I managed to drift off around 8 or 9 a.m., the sun was already rising, and my phone began ringing with calls from our kids. Emily and I have 2 children, a 24-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both of whom are in college and live on the same campus. Reflecting on everything now, I realize I acted hastily that night. I should have taken more time to plan my next steps to regain control of the situation. I've read numerous stories about people who pretended to act normally with their unfaithful partners while secretly plotting revenge and eventually exposing the affair. But in my case, pretending around Emily was impossible after what she had done. She wasn't just my wife. She was my closest friend, my better half in every way. Even if I had tried to deceive her, she would have seen right through it, and I couldn't bear to fake anything in front of her. The idea of Emily betraying me was the last thing I ever expected, so I hadn't prepared a plan for dealing with such a betrayal. When my children called me, I found myself at a loss for what to say. I needed to speak to one of them before they felt compelled to go to the police and report me missing. I decided to call my son, as he typically handles situations with more composure and maturity than my daughter does. I told him there was no easy way to share the news. His mother had cheated on me the previous night with her former admirer, stalker, or whatever you want to call him. I explained that I needed some time to process everything. He was visibly shocked to learn that his own mother could do something like this. Our family had always been known for its strong and loving bond, and now she had completely shattered that image. Our kids, along with relatives and friends, had always admired the close-knit, resilient family we built together. He couldn't comprehend that his mother would betray us in such a way and kept insisting there must be some misunderstanding. He repeatedly asked for the details, wanting everything explained in chronological order. I knew that going into all the specifics would only break his spirit before he even had a chance to start his own life. I expressed my wish that this was just a cruel joke, but the truth was that Mom had confessed her infidelity to me. At 24, he had already faced heartbreak, but I could tell this situation was weighing on him differently. I asked him to promise not to tell anyone until I had a chance to break the news myself. I sent a text to my daughter, telling her I was stressed about work and would be out of town for a while, which put an end to her calls. So, the situation was this. My daughter thought I was away on business, while both my son and Emily were aware of the separation. Over the next few days, I spent my time online searching for the best lawyers and solutions to my problems. That's when I stumbled upon an online community where many men had faced similar situations. I read stories about how they planned their revenge and took action against their cheating partners, including their anger towards the affair partners. I understood their feelings. I truly did. But seeking revenge on Emily was the last thing on my mind. I still love her deeply, and I'd be lying if I said I wanted to destroy her life in that way. However, I knew I couldn't be with her again. Reconciliation was simply not an option for me. I was uncertain about how to navigate this new reality or if I'd ever fully recover. I had countless responsibilities, my work, my children, my assets, and more. I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer for tomorrow and promised to provide updates as I made progress. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support. While reading your comments, I realized I missed sharing some key details. Both Emily and I had careers as management consultants, but in our late 40s, we both left our full-time jobs. Emily followed her passion for writing, while I became a self-employed business consultant for startups. I don't have a fixed workplace. One of you raised concerns about Emily possibly showing up at my workplace. Since I work from home or visit various client offices, I consult for multiple clients simultaneously. So far, Emily hasn't been able to track me down. As I mentioned earlier, we're approaching 60, and we've been planning our retirement for a long time. We've been saving up to buy a beach house in the countryside for our retirement, with plans to finalize the purchase next year. We even identified some properties and were in discussions with the owners. Thankfully, we hadn't bought anything yet. Otherwise, that would have created an entirely different set of challenges. Since I ghosted her, Emily has been trying to reach me. I met with a lawyer the day after my initial post, and he advised me to inform our children about the separation, given their age. We also discussed property division, and I've decided to split everything evenly between Emily and me. I refuse to retaliate by depriving her of her wealth. She's entitled to half of our assets, and she's earned it. She also deserves the separation she has brought upon herself. I know her well. She might even be willing to forfeit her claim to our wealth if it meant reconciling and keeping our family intact. While the divorce paperwork was being prepared, I arranged to meet my children. I asked my son to discreetly bring his sister to a restaurant without telling her I would be there. He agreed. The moment my daughter saw me, her reaction was intense. She bombarded me with questions. One of her first inquiries was whether I was cheating on Mom since I had cut off contact with her. Seeing her visibly upset pained me, but I had to stay strong for them and for the difficult conversation ahead. I calmed her down, assuring her that I wasn't involved with anyone else. Then, gradually, I disclosed the truth. Although my son already knew, he wasn't aware of my next steps. My daughter was devastated to learn that her mother had cheated on me. She had been living with Emily for the past 15 days since I left the house. She hugged me tightly and apologized for being angry with me. Both kids asked if there was any chance I would consider giving our marriage another shot. I made it clear that I was pursuing a divorce. They both broke down in tears. It was heart-wrenching to witness, but they understood my pain. They pledged to support me through this challenging period. I assured them that I was separating from their mother, not from them. Of course, my daughter informed me that Emily hadn't been eating or sleeping properly. She had been alternating between crying and nervously pacing, trying to reach me repeatedly. Emily even drove to several of my clients' offices, inquiring about my whereabouts, but they all told her I hadn't visited in 2 weeks. When our daughter asked her if something had happened between us, since this was the first time I had ever acted this way, Emily didn't respond to her question. Instead of facing the reality of the situation, Emily remained locked away in her room, crying and moaning. I instructed my daughter to stay with her mother until our divorce was finalized. I noticed their sorrow gradually morphing into anger whenever we discussed Emily. It was clear they felt deeply betrayed by her, and I completely understood their feelings. They were suffering a loss too. Our family had been torn apart, and one person was responsible for this devastation. However, I didn't want my children to develop a hatred towards their mother, so I urged them to offer her support instead. Believe it or not, a few days later, I received a text from Daniel, inquiring about Emily. He casually mentioned that if I was planning to divorce her after learning about her infidelity, he would be more than willing to take her off my hands. I shot back that Emily was a free woman who could make her own choices. After that, I blocked him. I knew he was trying to provoke me, but I felt surprisingly little anger toward him. I refused to fall for his manipulative tactics. I didn't marry, love, or trust him. Those feelings were all reserved for Emily, who had deeply betrayed me. I'm not insecure. If she chooses him, she can have him. I'm not worried about that. The divorce papers were supposed to arrive today, and I was still waiting for my daughter's call. As for Emily's reaction, I'll update you once the divorce is finalized. In the meantime, I have a mountain of responsibilities to sort through: my assets, my retirement plans, and the well-being of my children. Hey everyone, I realize it's been a while since my last update, and I'm sorry for the delay. Life has thrown a lot at me lately. First things first, my divorce has now been finalized. When Emily got the divorce papers, she didn't handle it well at all. She completely lost it. Until that point, she had been living in a fantasy world where she thought I was just angry and would eventually come back to her. That bubble burst the moment she received those papers. She insisted that my lawyer arrange a meeting with me, but my lawyer stood firm in his refusal. He pointed out that she was already getting half of everything, which was more than she deserved. Emily countered that she didn't want any assets. She only wanted me. I know her too well. She expressed a desire to meet with me one last time before signing the divorce papers, convinced that if we had just one conversation, she could persuade me to reconsider the separation. She was right to think that if I met her, I might waver. I still loved her and couldn't bear the thought of seeing her in pain. But I couldn't sacrifice my self-respect. She had taken me for granted. She dismantled our family for what reason? I don't want to delve into that abyss. I just know I can no longer live that way. My daughter reached out urgently, informing me that Emily's condition had deteriorated to the point of requiring hospitalization. She had sunk into a deep depression and was refusing any medication or nutritional support. Emily was admitted to the hospital and put on a liquid diet because she had completely stopped eating. I know many of you might view me as cold-hearted and selfish at this point, questioning whether I ever truly loved Emily due to my apparent indifference to her declining health. My answer is simple. Have you ever experienced betrayal? If you haven't, you can't begin to understand the pain I'm enduring. To say I loved and cherished my wife would be an understatement. I idolized her. I was her biggest supporter and fiercest advocate, and we had spent nearly 3 decades together. She is the mother of my children. Daniel was partially correct. Finding a woman like Emily is incredibly rare. She has intelligence, talent, empathy, and all the qualities one desires in a partner. I made sure to treat her with the respect she deserved. But what did she give me in return? She struck me at my most vulnerable moment. I never imagined, even in my worst nightmares, that she would betray me, especially with Daniel. A few days after Emily received the divorce papers, Sarah reached out. She checked in on me and asked about Emily. I told her we were going through a separation. Sarah didn't seem surprised and mentioned she was aware of the situation. Later, during a phone call, Sarah asked how I had found out about the affair. I explained that Emily had confessed. She expressed regret and revealed she had tried to warn Emily about Daniel. Sarah had advised her not to spend time with him, but Emily ignored her. Sarah shared something that only reinforced my decision to separate. Her version of events differed slightly from what Emily had told me. According to Sarah, she and Emily were happily dancing when Daniel approached and started making advances. He leaned in and whispered in Emily's ear, which Emily had claimed was an apology. Sarah felt uncomfortable with Daniel's behavior and attempted to intervene, but she noticed Emily seemed to be enjoying the attention. When Daniel suggested going for a walk, Emily looked to Sarah for guidance. Sarah firmly opposed the idea. Everyone knew how unsettling Daniel could be. But after some time, Emily excused herself and went for a walk with Daniel. Sarah wasn't overly concerned at first because Emily had expressed interest in spending time with him. She was having a good time with other friends when she realized Emily hadn't come back. Worried for Emily's safety, she went out to look for them. Can you believe where she found them? in the changing room of the college swimming pool. But Emily had claimed they were just out on the lawn. Sarah revealed that she caught them in the act, and they only stopped when Emily spotted her approaching. So it wasn't Emily's guilty conscience that interrupted their rendezvous. It was Sarah who caught them red-handed. Until this point, I had maintained some respect for Emily for owning up to her mistakes and confessing to me quickly. That gave me a sense of closure despite her devastating betrayal. I believed her story that she got carried away because of alcohol and that her conscience ultimately stopped her. But now it became clear that Emily didn't cheat on me because she was drunk. Emily did it because she wanted to. The college swimming pool was at least a 15-minute walk from where we were, and the changing rooms were tucked away deep inside the facility. You don't just accidentally end up there. It was a conscious choice on her part. After hearing Sarah's side of the story, she asked if I could see myself giving Emily another chance to mend our relationship. While Emily had admitted her mistakes, Sarah didn't know that Emily's confession was far from the whole truth, and I chose not to clarify or answer her question. Despite Emily's pathetic state, she had deceived me, and that was when I lost all respect for her. In the meantime, my kids informed me that Emily was spiraling further down, teetering on the edge of self-harm. Hearing this made me act. I called Sarah to recount our previous conversation, where I had received a different narrative from Emily. I asked her to visit Emily and have an honest conversation. Emily had been keeping her secret locked away, which was causing her immense suffering. I also instructed Sarah to let Emily know that I was now aware of the real story from that night, and that I had no intention of forgiving her or taking her back. It was crucial for Emily to focus on her well-being, as I knew she was intentionally hurting herself, hoping it would lead to reconciliation. After all, I know her better than anyone, right? Sarah went to see Emily and gave me an update afterward. While Emily hadn't fully bounced back from her depression and weakness, my daughter reported that she was showing signs of improvement. Plus, Emily had finally signed the divorce papers, which was a huge relief for me. My next step is to tie up loose ends with my work and embark on a solo journey. I've decided to ditch my previous plan of settling down in one place. I know that would drive me insane. I recognize that I haven't handled everything as smoothly as some people in this community have when faced with similar situations, but I've done my best given the circumstances. Let's see what the future holds. I'll keep everyone updated. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. It's been a year since my last update. I wish I could say that time has flown by, but it certainly hasn't felt that way for me. I spent a few months in a motel before moving into a condo until my divorce was finalized. Regarding work, I gradually transitioned to clients I could handle entirely remotely. As for the retirement savings that Emily and I had set aside, she received 50% of it, and I divided my share evenly between our 2 adult children. I don't need that money, and I trust them to use it wisely. Emily is still in therapy. Sarah stays in touch with her and checks in on me from time to time. She recently shared something surprising about Emily that I never anticipated. Now, keep in mind that this information comes from Sarah, who continues to support Emily, so take it with a grain of skepticism. However, I trust that she has no reason to mislead me. Here's the shocking revelation. Despite my assertions that I know Emily well, even after her infidelity, this new information made me question whether I ever truly understood her. I always viewed Emily as a strong woman with a resilient spirit, but it seems that loneliness has taken a toll. Emily started chatting with Daniel again, and he reciprocated by professing his love for her, until he found out about our divorce. Oddly enough, the moment he learned of the divorce, he began acting strangely and essentially ghosted her. Emily was heartbroken when Daniel cut off all communication after she told him about the divorce. She reminded him of his previous declarations of love and his desire to be with her despite everything. But it turned out he was only interested in a casual fling. He claimed he couldn't commit to a serious relationship or any emotional involvement with Emily, citing her strong-willed nature as a reason. For those who know Emily, it's almost unbelievable that she would plead with Daniel for a relationship. She couldn't have stooped lower, given Daniel's unsavory reputation. He laid bare his true intentions by admitting he was only seeking physical intimacy, while Emily yearned for emotional support. He mentioned having a live-in partner and being satisfied with that arrangement. It appears that all his professed love and admiration were merely a facade. When Emily and Daniel had a disagreement, he ended it with a cruel comment, indirectly taunting her by suggesting that he had outsmarted her. He claimed to have thought Emily was intelligent, yet he managed to manipulate her, implying that he was the cleverer one. This revelation sent her spiraling deeper into depression, realizing she had lost everything by falling for his deceitful promises. The last update I received about Emily came a couple of weeks ago. My daughter had been staying with Emily since I moved out, providing her with companionship to cope with her depression. However, after a year, my daughter realized she could no longer live with Emily, who had become increasingly difficult. Emily, who once exhibited emotional strength, has now transformed into an insecure, erratic individual constantly seeking the attention of others. She has become controlling and possessive, bombarding my children with calls and messages if they don't respond immediately. She even pressured my son to move in with her until he got married, but he firmly turned down her request. Emily has been pushing my daughter to spend more time at home instead of going out with friends or taking vacations. My children are adults now. They can't be restricted like that. Whenever my daughter tried to address Emily's intrusive behavior, Emily would break down, expressing her fear of losing them, especially after losing me. My children reassured her that they had no intention of abandoning her and were doing their best to support her through her depression. However, they warned her that if she continued to be controlling, they might have to reconsider their relationship with her. This led to heated arguments, with the kids accusing her of not being there for them during their most challenging moments. This behavior is entirely foreign to me, and my children are equally perplexed by it. Ultimately, they confronted her, explaining that her actions had fractured our once happy and loving family. What was once a harmonious and secure family environment is now shattered and distorted. It was a bitter pill for Emily to swallow, realizing that her own children held her accountable for everything that went wrong. 2 weeks ago, my daughter moved out. She told me she had done her best to support Emily, but couldn't put her own life on hold for someone who wouldn't help themselves. I believe my daughter's decision was entirely reasonable. She needs to forge her own path, and Emily must reclaim control over her life. While some might take pleasure in witnessing their unfaithful ex-partner wallow in misery, I found no joy in this situation. I genuinely felt sorry for Emily. Her poor choices have sentenced her to a lifetime of suffering. I truly hope she can rediscover her former self, the confident, strong woman who doesn't need to rely on people like Daniel for emotional validation. As for my own journey, I've spent the past year traveling through 4 different countries, exploring local cultures, savoring diverse cuisines, and immersing myself in entirely new lifestyles has been an incredible experience. Initially, I felt disheartened that my retirement plans had taken such a sharp turn. I had always envisioned spending my golden years peacefully alongside Emily. However, I now find fulfillment in embracing the various cultures and lifestyles I've encountered. I've met remarkable people across different corners of the globe. To be clear, I haven't entered any new relationships, nor am I actively searching for one at the moment. I'm open to whatever the future may hold, and I promise to keep you updated if anything significant occurs. Hello, everyone. I apologize for the radio silence over the past couple of years. Honestly, not much noteworthy has happened during that time, aside from my extensive travels to more than a dozen countries and rediscovering my passion for painting. When I first started this thread to share my story about my cheating wife, it didn't feel right to update it with my travel experiences, so I held off. However, there's been a significant event that prompted me to write this update last month. After 4 years, I had the opportunity to meet Emily again, all thanks to my son's upcoming wedding. Yes, my son has found the love of his life and decided to tie the knot. He called me 2 months before the wedding and expressed his desire for Emily and me to meet the girl's parents. I was hesitant at first, suggesting I could meet them directly at the wedding. But then I realized it wasn't about me. It was about fulfilling my responsibilities as a father. The girl's parents graciously hosted a dinner for us a week before the wedding. Although I hadn't confirmed my attendance, I decided to go at the last minute. It was somewhat challenging to see Emily in this context, as I would have preferred to attend alone. Nevertheless, I understood that I needed to be there for my son. When I arrived, Emily seemed taken aback. She looked different, and her eyes reflected the changes she had undergone. She greeted me with a polite smile, but I could sense her tension. Over the years, she had always maintained her long, thick hair, but it seemed like she had aged more than I expected during our time apart. Interestingly, they seated us next to each other at the table, which made me suspect that our son hadn't informed them this would be our first encounter in years. This situation posed no problem, though. In front of everyone, Emily remained silent, but as soon as we had a moment alone, she commented that I looked healthier and happier. I acknowledged her observation, attributing it to cutting out all the toxicity from my life. This seemed to catch her off guard momentarily, and she glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. She asked if I was in a relationship, but I dodged the question, telling her that my status shouldn't concern her. Throughout our conversation, I made sure to avoid eye contact, keeping my attention focused on everyone else, especially as the dinner came to an end. As I said goodnight to everyone with hugs, I simply nodded at Emily, telling her to take care. I think that surprised her. She stood up as I was saying my goodbyes to the group, but it all happened so quickly that it didn't feel awkward for anyone else. Surprisingly, my interaction with Emily was pretty uneventful. She seemed either intimidated by me or too anxious to engage in deeper conversation. I didn't dwell on it. After leaving the gathering, my son walked with me and suggested I stay with him for a few days, but I declined, assuring him I would call. I then drove to my hotel. Just so you know, I don't have a permanent residence. I mostly travel, and when I'm in town, I stay in motels. Transitioning to a nomadic lifestyle after being a family man for 26 years was challenging, but I've grown accustomed to this adventurous way of living, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Aside from my family situation, I have another update. I now have a companion. Yes, during my trip to Tokyo 2 years ago, I met Megan, who is 52 years old. She had recently come out of an abusive relationship and was enjoying her first solo trip. We connected while hiking up a mountain, and we became friends since neither of us was looking for anything romantic at that time. After our time in Tokyo, I was about to head to South Korea while she was off to Thailand. We stayed in touch for the next 6 months and eventually decided to plan our travels together. For the past year and a half, we have explored over 8 countries together. We took our time getting to know each other during the first 2 months, being clear from the outset that neither of us was interested in marriage. For now, we want to relish the experience of traveling and exploring new places. My children know about Megan, but they chose not to tell Emily, fearing it might trigger her depression again. After arriving at the hotel, I called my son to explain why I had turned down his offer to stay with him, letting him know that Megan had accompanied me and I couldn't leave her alone. I expressed my desire for Megan to attend the wedding, and my son was excited but also apprehensive about how Emily would react. I emphasized that Megan deserved to be there because she's my partner and should meet the family. To get a second opinion, my son added my daughter to the call, but it was mostly a chance for the 3 of us to discuss it together. She agreed with me that Megan should meet everyone. With just a week until the wedding, I took that time to show Megan around the city since it was her first visit to Kentucky. On the day of the wedding, as soon as we arrived, I noticed Emily glaring at me. Her face fell when she saw me holding hands with Megan. I had already warned Megan about the possibility of Emily's unpleasant behavior, but she reassured me that she could handle whatever came our way. This was the first time I realized just how controlling Emily had become since our separation. She rushed over, grabbed my wrist, and tried to pull me aside. I firmly told her I wasn't interested in a private conversation. She demanded to know if Megan was my girlfriend or if I planned to marry her. I told her that it wasn't her concern and asked her to leave us alone, especially since guests were arriving and people were starting to notice Emily's tears and anger. She insisted she didn't care about anyone else and needed to sort this out, one way or another. My daughter jumped in, trying to calm Emily down, but Emily refused to budge. We pointed out that she was causing a scene at the wedding, to which she loudly replied that she didn't care. At that moment, my typically gentle daughter transformed into a force to be reckoned with. I never expected to see her lose her cool like this. In a low, commanding voice, she said, "Mom, you were supposed to walk into this wedding on Dad's arm, but you chose to be with some random guy instead." She added, "So either accept this and move on right now, or I'll make sure you're kicked out of the wedding before it even begins." I almost stepped in, as any parent might when witnessing their child in distress. But my daughter was stronger than I could ever be when it came to her mother. As she pointed her finger at Emily and meant every word, I felt Emily's grip on my wrist loosen. I watched Emily's face tremble as she released me, her eyes darting between anger, betrayal, and sadness. She didn't utter a word, but her expression revealed a storm of emotions. After that, Emily walked away. Unsurprisingly, she didn't introduce herself to Megan. On a brighter note, my daughter apologized to Megan, who hugged both of us tightly. I reassured her that there was no need to apologize. I was proud of my daughter for standing up for herself. I could see that she was emotional when she said, "It's on you, Dad. We've all suffered enough. Mom needs to move on or leave you alone." Emily had made everyone's life miserable, yet she had expected sympathy and care from her friends all these years. My children no longer have a family home to gather in for special occasions, and I acknowledge my role in that. Throughout the wedding, Emily grew increasingly upset as she noticed our children supporting me. She spent most of her time standing alone in a corner, more isolated than a mother of the groom should be. She didn't even join us for the family photo. A few days later, Sarah called to inform me that Emily took my moving on so quickly as a blow to her ego while she remained single. I told Sarah that my children and I are done with Emily's drama. She's on her own now. She can do as she pleases. I just want to enjoy the remaining years of my life in peace. I'm considering staying closer to my kids and creating a family home where we can gather peacefully, even though they're adults. This wedding made me realize I'm entering a new stage in life and might soon become a grandparent. However, I won't share that news with Emily, and I'm perfectly fine with that. We'll see how Megan feels when the time comes. I want to take a moment to express my gratitude for the advice and genuine experiences shared by many of you. I wish you all the best in remaining loyal and true to your spouses, not just for yourselves or your partners, but for your children. Life is good, and there's always more to enjoy. Take care.